all of you take your Bibles now, if you will, please, and turn with me to the 30th chapter of the book of Isaiah. Now, I quote verse 9 often of this particular chapter, where Isaiah said, it's a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of Jehovah, that say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceit. Now, here is a powerful verse. I'm talking about verse 9, verse 10 of this chapter. But let's go back, if you will, please, to verse 1 and read the entire connection up to this time, some 8 or 9 verses. Now listen to what this prophet had to say. Woe to the rebellious children, saith Jehovah, that take counsel, but not of me, that make a league, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, and set out to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to take refuge in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the refuge in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. For their princes are at Zoan, and their ambassadors are come to Hanes. They shall all be ashamed because of a people that cannot profit them, that are not a help nor profit, but a shame and also a reproach. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I understand this correctly, God is simply saying that when people rebel against Him, and when they fail to listen to Him, they will seek help, refuge, other places. Now, this is exactly what happened to the Jew. You remember when they violated God's law, and when God did not bless them as they ought to have been blessed simply because of that rebellion, they said, that's perfectly all right. We'll go down in Egypt and Pharaoh will help us. They didn't understand that God was the God of Pharaoh, just like He was the God of the Jew. I'm talking about that God is the God of the world, and the world listens to Him, that He can say what He will, and it'll come to pass. But they simply thought that they could get outside of the boundary of God, that they could get outside of His help, outside the arm of His strength. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it can't be done. And only a rebellious children would say that. They will take counsel, but not of me. And they'll make a league, but not of my spirit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the history of man. There is no better epitaph than this right here. And that is that we listen to people all right, but we don't listen to the right ones. Now, notice in verse 9, if you will, that he says again that it is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of Jehovah. Now, jump back up into verse 8, and let's get the connection again. Go now, write it before them on a tablet, and inscribe it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever. For it is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of Jehovah. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me say this, and listen to me well if you will. God not only sends His Word, but He sends preachers. He sends prophets. The only difference in a true man of God, I'm talking about an individual that preaches this Bible, and the Bible is that preachers are temporary. They're transit. They will be here for a while, and then they pass off the stage of action because of death or because of sickness or for some other cause. All right, now, if we listen to preachers as we ought, and if all the preachers did what God had intended they originally do, like the Apostle Paul told the young preacher Timothy, that the things that you have heard of me, then you commit into the hands of faithful men that will be able to teach others also. And if we had enough of these people around the world, then of course the Word of God would not be necessary. But ladies and gentlemen, since we don't have this kind of preacher, and since because we don't have enough of them, if we did have a few of them, and at the very same time there is no perpetuating of this particular thing, God says, now then, I want you to write my word down in a book. So when the prophets are rejected, and when the prophets die, my word will abide forever. Now this is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, that heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass. Now listen to what he said in verse 8. Go now, write it before them on a tablet, and inscribe it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you may rebel against what I preach or any other gospel preacher. You may be a rebellious people, just like these people here that Isaiah is speaking to, but at the very same time, even though we leave, or even though we die, or even though you may shut our mouths, the Word of God is still here, and it's still speaking out, just like the blood of Abel from the ground. And the God of heaven knows what He says, and you will be condemned, and I will be condemned, simply because we're not listening to this Word. Now notice in verse 11, get you out of the way. Turn aside out of the paths. Cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. Now let's go back and get it again. For it's a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of Jehovah, that say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceit, get you out of the way. Turn aside out of the path. Cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. Wherefore saith the Holy One of Israel, because ye despise this word, and trust in oppression and perverseness, and rely therein, therefore this iniquity shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall, whose breaking cometh suddenly and in an instant. And he shall break it as a potter's vessel is broken, breaking it in his pieces without sparing, so that there shall not be found among the pieces thereof a sherd wherewith to take fire from the hearth, or to dip water out of the cistern. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's a frightening thing to think about what Jehovah God can do. Now, notice in verse 27, if you will, as we're looking here. Behold, the name of Jehovah cometh from far, burning with his anger, and in thick rising clouds. His lips are full of indignation, and his tongue is as a devouring fire, and his breath is as an overflowing stream that reacheth even unto the neck, to sift the nations with a sieve of destruction, and a bridle that causeth shall be in the jaws of the people. You see that? A bridle that causeth to shall be in the jaws of the people. Ye shall have a song as in the night, when a holy feast is kept in gladness of heart, and when one goeth with a pipe to come into the mountain of Jehovah, to the rock of Israel. Now look back again in verse 18, if you will. Jehovah is a God of justice. Therefore will Jehovah wait, that he may be gracious unto you, and therefore will be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you, for Jehovah is a God of justice. Blessed are they that wait for him. Now, my friends, there's two things that's characteristics of modern man. Not only modern man, but man in general. And that is that we want to either run ahead of God, or we want to fall behind him. Now, this is exactly what happened in the case of Jonah. You remember when God told Jonah to do something, he ran ahead of him, ran away from him. And then he lagged behind and run ahead of him. Now, friends, this is exactly what we're doing today. And this is what he said right here. People will not wait for him. Now, we've got to sit down and wait for God and listen to what God said. We don't want to listen to it. We don't want to wait. We want somebody else to tell us something. Now, you'll remember that Jeremiah said in Jeremiah chapter 10 that it's not in man that walketh to direct his own steps. We don't know how to direct our steps. And therefore, we go out as a rebellious people and seek to ourselves men that will tell us what we want to hear. Now, notice, if you will, that there has never been a time when men did not desire preachers, our prophets, our seers. We want them. We want to listen to them. The only thing we want is for them to tell us exactly what we want to hear. And this is what he said right here. A rebellious people, a lying children, children that will not hear the law of Jehovah, that say to the seers, to the prophets, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things. Now notice, ladies and gentlemen, that these people wanted prophets, and they wanted to listen to prophets, but they wanted these prophets to tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. Now, the very same thing is true. There'll never be a time, my friends, listen to me. There will never be a time that the world will not be dotted with churches, some kind of buildings where people play religion, where they offer some kind of worship to some imaginary God. There will always be priest and priestess occupying these temples and these buildings. But the thing about it, ladies and gentlemen, is this, that the people demand that these fellas tell them exactly what they want to hear. Now you'll notice over there in 1 Timothy, where the Apostle Paul said, or 2 Timothy, where the Apostle Paul says, that the time will come when men will not endure sound doctrine. It didn't say that they would cast aside all doctrine. It simply said that they would not endure sound doctrine. And they will heap to themselves teachers. It didn't say they would turn their back on teachers. It didn't say that they would eliminate teachers, because people like teachers. They will heap to themselves teachers after their own lust. Men that will scratch and tickle their ears. You understand that? Now, you don't need to say that Brother Rudd is saying that all these churches are going to come to naught. Why, no. And we're just going to have wave after wave after wave of young preachers and young women that have no respect for God's law coming out of our colleges and seminaries and cemeteries every year to occupy these pulpits. And people will pay for these kind of things. And they will send money away to have these young people educated to come back into the pulpits and preach. But the thing they want are preachers that will preach what they want to hear. You understand? And this is the sad thing about it. We've been doing this, and we've been doing it too long. And this is what's wrong with the world right now. We are a rebellious people, verse 1 of Isaiah 3, or Isaiah 30, a rebellious people that take counsel, but not of me. Now, I read the other day, ladies and gentlemen, that there's 500,000 support groups in the United States alone. We've got all kinds of problems. How many of them? 500,000, 500,000 support groups. In other words, we've got people that are addicted to alcohol, and they've got to have a group to come together and talk. We've got people that are addicted to drugs, and they can't control themselves, and they've got to come together and have a group that will support them. We've got a bunch of old women that are addicted to stealing, shoplifting, and they have formed them a little league where they get together, they can lean on one another. We've got young girls and boys that get pregnant out here before marriage, and they can't control it, and they've got to have a group to support themselves. Now, they take counsel. Now, we've got more counselors than you can shake a stick at. We've got more counselors and more people that full of advice than Carter's got pills. But, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to notice that he says right here that these rebellious people take counsel, but not of me. And they make a league, but not of the Spirit. You understand? Now take your Bibles, if you will, please, and turn back with me into the 25th chapter of the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 25. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's not a better book in the Bible than the book of Proverbs to read to tell you how to live. I'm talking about as ordinary people on this earth, how to deal with yourself, how to take care of your business, how to take care of your neighbor, and so forth. In other words, the book of Proverbs is simply a good, down-to-earth, practical book. Good advice. There's not another book in these 66 books of the Bible that I have read more throughout the year than the book of Proverbs. You've heard me say many, many times that I've probably studied in detail Revelation more, but as far as just sitting down and reading for my own use, my own satisfaction, my own benefit and edification, there's no other book that I read more than the book of Proverbs. Now, I said that while you're turning to the 25th chapter, and let's see what he said. After we've got the introduction in verse 1, we get down to business in verse 2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me say that a proverb is somewhat of a truth couched obscurely. By that I simply mean it's a hidden truth. What we've got to do is look down beyond the words to find out the truth, what is being said. Now look, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing. Now Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 30 that we ought to stop and wait for God. Now Moses was told the very same thing when those Israelites under his leadership came up to the bank of the Red Sea, and he simply said, stand still and watch Jehovah work. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we've got to do. Instead of wearing ourselves sick about what's happening, why don't we just sit back and wait and let God work this mess out for us? But we don't want to do it. This is what I said in the outset. We run ahead of God. We want to take counsel. We're not willing to take counsel of God, but somebody else. But it's the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the glory of kings to search out a matter, to make plans. This is all we want. The people in the political realm just cannot wait for Ross Perot to come out with a plan of how to straighten up the government and how to run the government. We just can't wait. Now, we can't wait for the president to tell us what he was going to do. We can't wait for anything. But now then, I want you to notice that the kings are the ones that are always searching out matters and telling us what they're to do, but it never happens. You heard me say last week that every leader of Russia, communist Russia, from Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, all the way down the line, these individuals have been telling the Russian people that if you'll give me 5 years, I'll work out a plan where we can produce enough food to take care of ourselves. Now, we've been doing the same thing in this country. We have a little up and down economic recession, and we say, well, just give us enough of time and we'll work ourselves out of it. Or give us enough of time and we'll straighten up the mess that our schools have gotten into. You've heard me say that we run our educational system on a 10-year basis. In other words, in 10 years, we're going to have the schools all straightened up. Now, you people that are listening to me in 1992, I want you to remember in 2000 that I heard a little preacher that I thought was stupid say that the school system would still be in the mess in 2000 that it is now, and see if I'm not right. And then if you live long enough to live to 2020, you'll find that you'll hear people say in this decade, this is the decade that we're going to get things straight. In other words, this is the way kings operate. But what we need to do is to believe in God with all of our heart and simply sit back and watch Him as He works things out. But let's read on. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. You can't figure out what they're going to do. You can't figure out what Congress will do. You can't figure out what a king will do. They'll tell you one thing and turn right around and do something else. If you don't believe it, all you got to do is read my lips, and 6 months later read them again, and they're saying the very same thing they did before. Now, you don't have to be very smart to say that. I can remember when Eisenhower was president, and the Russians shot down our U-2 flight with Gary Powers, and he got up on the television and said, we don't have such a thing as a U-2 plane. There is no such thing. And 2 weeks later he came back and said, yes, people, that's true. Now, the very same thing, we learn every time we turn on the radio that something that's happened a year ago that we're just now finding out was a lie, and they're telling us this and telling us that. But we go on listening to these people because that's what we want to listen to, rather than to take counsel of God. Take away the dross from the silver, and there cometh forth a vessel from the refiner. Now get rid of all of this junk. Eliminate this tomfoolery. Why, now watch me. Take away the wicked from among the king, and his throne shall be established in righteousness. Now, why can't we do that? Why can't we understand that it is righteousness that exalt a nation? But when we take that away, that throne will be destroyed. Put not thyself forward in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. For better is it, they say unto thee, come up hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince. Now, what is he saying? Simply don't be too hasty in what you're doing. Sit back and wait until you know exactly where you are at. I say oftentimes, ladies and gentlemen, if a person will watch every step that he takes, he'll not step on a snake. The thing that's wrong with us is that we're running headlong into places that angels fear to tread. And we're getting ourselves in trouble. And we're ashamed to admit that we've made a mistake and simply turn around and back out and do something right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we've done in our homes. This is what we've done in our government. This is what's happened in the church. Now, you don't have to be a Solomon to see that we're in a mess. The churches are going downhill, downhill, downhill. Why don't we just admit it and say, apparently what we've been doing for the last 35 or 40 years has not worked, and let's stop and back up and start doing what we were doing when the churches were growing. You don't have to be very smart to understand that. There was a time when we had some strong preachers standing in the pulpit. And when those preachers preached, then we had responses to the invitation. We didn't have to get out here and build gymnasiums. We didn't have to get out here and build all of these things to entertain kids. And we didn't have to go down here and buy ice cream and pop and all this stuff to get children to come to school and borrow sectarian vacation Bible school material from the sectarians in order to get people. We didn't have to have dinners every time you turn around to get people in the church and to keep them in there. What did it? It was simply preaching. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've used all of this stuff. We've used the sectarians' vacation Bible schools, and we've bought ice cream and candy and pop and everything else, and still the churches are going downhill. Now, why don't we admit that it won't work and simply back out and say, God, forgive me, I made a mistake. Now, listen to me. Listen to me. All right, God says, listen to me. Listen what? Listen to what I've got to say. What's written in the book. Now, you did away with my prophet, but now then, what he was saying is written in the book. Go read the book. That is what he's saying. Now, go not forth hastily to strive. Verse 9, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof. When thy neighbor hath put thee to shame, debate thy cause with thy neighbor himself, and disclose not the secrets of another, lest he that heareth it revile thee in thine infamy. Turn not away. As a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and networks of silver, as an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's one of the points that I want to bring out right here. Listen to me. An earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold are beautiful things to look at. So is the wise reprover, an individual that will get up and reprove us for our foolishness and reprove us in wisdom. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot be foolish and stick with God's book. And when we attack the problems of our age from God's standpoint, then we are wise reprovers. You see that? All right, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient heart. Now, Jeremiah was a wise reprover, but he didn't get anything done. Why? Because there were no obedient ears in his day. Now, simply because we're not getting results is no reflection on us. Someone said, Brother Rudd, are you discouraged? Why, no. Jeremiah didn't give up. He didn't make any converts. People didn't believe him because they did not have obedient ears. But I can assure you of one thing, ladies and gentlemen, that if there's anyone out here with an obedient ear, when he hears what we say as wise reprovers, then, of course, they're going to straighten their lives up. Now, what happens in between, I don't know. What happens with you and God, that's between you and God. That's not me. God tells me to preach. You see what I see? Say what I say? As the cold of snow in the time of harvest, so is a faithful messenger to them that sent him. For he refresheth the soul of his masters. As clouds and wind without rain, so is he that boasteth himself of his gifts falsely. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a lot of preachers that are boasting their gifts falsely. I'm preaching God's law. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. You're not doing it. You can't do it. You cannot prove what you're saying by this book. I challenge you to put your finger on this Bible and show me what you're preaching is right. Now, there's no doubt about it. Now, let's drop down here, ladies and gentlemen, to verse 19 before we close. And here's the verse to go right over yonder with Isaiah chapter 30. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. Now, that's what's wrong with us right now. We've got tooth trouble. We've got sprained ankles. And the reason why we have them is simply because we have been putting confidence in the wrong people. Now, someone said, well, Brother Rudd, who do you suggest? I simply suggest, like Jeremiah, to understand, number one, that you cannot trust yourself. Number two, that there's not a man living on the face of the earth that knows how to direct you. Therefore, you've got to go to God. This is what I'm saying. We've got to go to this Bible. Ladies and gentlemen, we speak where the Bible speaks. We remain silent where the Bible's silent. We do Bible things, Bible ways, called Bible things, Bible names. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we stick with this, I'm talking about sticking with this word, with this record, listening to God, then, of course, we're not going to have the trouble that we're having in our homes, in our churches, in our schools, in our government, in the world. We have trouble all over. And the reason why is simply because we have put confidence in unfaithful men. Unfaithful men in time of trouble. Now let me propound to you this question, straightforward, right straight at you. Are we living in a time of trouble? Ladies and gentlemen, when 7 or 8% of the workforce of the United States is unemployed, and if I remember correctly, we've got about 100 million employers or employees in this country. People that are working for someone else. All right, now, 7% or 8% of 100,000, we're talking about 7 or 8 million people. Did you ever stop to think about that? That are out of work. All right, now, we don't have enough of money in the treasury to pay the national debt. Is that trouble? We're having trouble all over the country with the weather. Earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, cyclones, all of this. Is this trouble? We're having trouble in diseases. Is it trouble? Well, we just go on putting confidence in the wrong people in the time. Who should we believe in? We should believe in Jehovah God. That's exactly what he says. When you put your faith in unfaithful men in time of trouble, it's just like a man who has a broken tooth and a foot that's out of joint. Now that's simple, ladies and gentlemen. You don't have to be a Solomon to dig down underneath this and find out what's wrong. Now, as I said before, we want preachers. We want them. We need them. We've got to have them. It isn't that we don't like preachers. It's simply that we want preachers that will tell us what we want to hear. You see that? Now this is what Isaiah said, that say to the seer, see not, and say to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, prophesy unto us deceit. All right, now, if we're being deceived and if we're paying people to deceive us and to lie to us, ladies and gentlemen, is there ever a time or will there ever be a time that we will not have trouble? The only way that we're going to get out of the trouble that we're in, the mess that we're in, is simply to admit it and then get some people in here that know this book and say, tell us what this book says. Tell us what God says. Now, in the last minute, in the 8th chapter of the book of Acts, we find a very powerful man. I'm talking about the treasurer of the queen of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. He was riding along in a chariot reading. And Philip came up and said, do you understand what you read? And the man said, no, I don't. How can I, except some man should guide me? And he invited Philip to come up because he apparently understood that he knew. And he invited him to get up in the chariot and explain this matter to him. Now, ladies and gentlemen, he who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool. You better stay out of his way. Now, people that are in trouble but don't have enough of sense to know they're in trouble, I'm telling you what, they're sure enough in trouble. You understand that? And if we don't have enough of sense to see that the people that we're listening to are getting us deeper and deeper in trouble, then we're really in a bad shape. Now, the thing that we've got to do is simply say, Lord, you speak. I know you're right. I know that you will lead me right. You will tell me right. And ladies and gentlemen, the way he does it is in this Bible. That's the thought that I want to leave with you right now. That this Bible is the only safe rule of faith and practice. I appreciate the way you listen. I hope I've stimulated a little thought. This is Don Rudd. Until I talk with you again, have a very pleasant good day.